So you can lift the whole market in a much more efficient way if you target the influencers and give them the tools to exert their influence.
Hello again and welcome to Velocitize Talks. My name is Andy North. I'm joined today by Maria Twena, partner and global head of Consumer X at 9thWonder in Los Angeles. Maria, thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Tell us about 9thWonder and what you're excited about in the market today.
Yeah, so 9thWonder is interesting because it's an agency distinct from others that I've worked at in my career. It's a mini holding company, if you will, with multiple agencies that specialize in unique disciplines. And we have 7 offices throughout the world, including Argentina and Vietnam, headquartered in Houston. Very interesting approach to everything we do. It's all bottom up, meaning that all media plans, all consumer briefs, et cetera, are based on the consumer first. We don't take a macro approach to anything. Everything is a micro approach. And that has me very excited because I'm all about consumer insights and leveraging consumer insights, activating insights. And this is an agency that's very much focused on that. That has me very excited.
Tell us about the Latinx practice and how that began.
So Latinx is part of the Consumer X discipline, which I manage. And Latinx is really about understanding who are the influencers within the Latino community. Consumer X at a paramount level, at a global level, is all about identifying those consumers that hide in plain sight, yet drive 2 things: exponential revenue and fandom. And so within the Hispanic Martin or Latinx, there is a consumer cohort that drives revenue and fandom, and those are basically the children of immigrants. So what typically happens is the second generation, which is the first one born in the U.S. with at least one foreign-born parent, and the 1.5 generation, which no one ever talks about, and it's a big consumer cohort. The 1.5 is the immigrant that on paper comes across as a foreign-born immigrant, but they immigrate to the U.S. at the age of 10 or less. So they are considered a 1.5 generation immigrant. They're socialized here. They come as children. So they behave most like their second generation brothers and sisters, the ones that were born here. And these folks are highly influential because as children, they become Sherpas for their foreign-born parents, translating the language, interpreting the U.S. ethos, informing brand and product purchases, demystifying services and technology. And it's not something that stops when they turn 21 or 18. They keep this influential behavior throughout their lives. And as they mature, their sphere of influence actually becomes culturally agnostic. It's not just Latino, it's non-Latino as well, because they have friends that are non-Hispanic as well. So it's a fascinating practice. I'm very committed to it. I myself am a second generation immigrant. So I've lived this, I understand it viscerally, and I study it all the time. So I love it.
Why is that bicultural, bilingual cohort so important, and what can brands do to engage them?
Well, it's so important because if we stick to the Hispanic side of this, they represent 55% of the Hispanic market. So over half the market is this bilingual, bicultural cohort. And what brands need to do is break free from the model that they've had in the past, just targeting the Spanish dominant first generation immigrant. That's an important group. It represents 28% of the market, but your influencers are somewhere else. They're not watching telenovelas on TV. They're online. They're a mobile first consumer, socially active. You need to reach and touch them and then give them the tools and the assets so they can then share with their parents. So they co-brand it, if you will, for them. It's like giving them the good housekeeping seal of approval. So you can lift the whole market in a much more efficient way if you target the influencers and give them the tools to exert their influence.
Are there any best practices that you can share to our viewers?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of best practices against this target. Primarily, you speak to them in English. That's always the first question. Speak to them in English, but wink at them in Spanish. And what we mean by that is make sure there are linguistic cues in Spanish, words that would resonate with the target, cultural cues. Speak to them based on their life experience, not yours. So if you know that individual has played the role of Sherpa their whole life, how do you speak to an individual that has had that role? Make sure that they understand that you empower them, that you welcome them, validate them, which is basic advertising. But anything outside of that, I need to charge you for. But those at a high level, those are the recommendations.
Well, I know you've done a lot of research into this cohort. Are there any new findings that you can share with us today?
Yeah, actually, we have some new findings which have been very interesting. So we know that the Latino market is collective by nature, right? Their ethos is all about family and community over self. And what we did a study recently with our partner, Think Now, our research partner, to see if that collective behavior that we see offline transfers to online. And we had some amazing findings. It does transfer to online. 80% of this population does searches for their family or friends, primarily for their Spanish language dominant family or friends. So we see this collective behavior online, and we're seeing it in three key areas, which are the three key digital touch points for any campaign: search, content consumption, how is the content consumed in what language, and how a lot of these folks are verbally translating for their families, and then e-commerce transaction, helping them purchase the product, giving them information, guiding them through the process. So the more you can facilitate that process for that digital Sherpa, in this case, if you will, the better their brand experience, and the higher the opportunity to acquire the consumer and to drive advocacy rates.
There have been so many changes in digital marketing over just the last 2 years, and probably 10x changes over the last few months since the COVID pandemic has set in globally. What are some of the changes that you've seen, whether it's over the last 2 years or over the last several months in digital marketing?
Yeah, so definitely over the last several months, well, the consumer behavior has changed, so the digital marketing has to change, right? So consumers are spending more time online, staying inside. Their ability to touch and feel products has diminished, if not completely obviated across the board. So the need for brands to really focus on their digital assets and on their direct-to-consumer digital marketing, I think has been one of the most profound changes. I think it's less about them looking for leads and more about them for how do I drive engagement and build an online brand, because that's the long-term opportunity for all of these brands. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future, how many retail establishments will go out of business, which ones will stay, how will that change? So this amalgamation, if you will, of the digital and the physical world in a new way is going to be one of the biggest drivers of change in the upcoming months and years. I mean, we're seeing already just a lot of opportunity, a lot of changes in what does a website look like, what needs to be important, how do we drive engagement online versus just eyes or views. So a lot of opportunity to really focus on your online brand, what it represents, where can they find you, what do you look like when they get there, what do you sound like, what words do you use, are they the same, is the lexicon different because of the environment we're living in, etc.
Is there a book, a blog, or a podcast that you're fond of that you'd like to share with our readers?
I like to read a lot. So there are two books that I think are very interesting. Reese and Trout's book on positioning, The Battle for the Mind, is a classic that I always go to and I love. And that's at a very micro level. And then at a macro level, Sam Huntington, who was a late professor at Harvard, wrote a book called Clash of Civilizations years ago, which I read to get inside the general market consumer cohort's mindset, to really understand what it meant to be American. And, there are a lot of things in the book I don't like, especially his views on immigration, but I didn't read it for that. I read it for what is it to be American? Because I was born here, but my parents weren't American or non-American. So the ethos was very different. The ethos in the U.S. is all about the Protestant work ethic and self-reliance and independence, and those are the values that we cherish, right? But for a Latino, it's very different. It's a collective ethos. It's all about interdependence, not independence. That, in and of itself, is one of the huge cultural differences within these cohorts between being bilingual, bicultural, and American. Multi-generationally. So I think that's a great book to read, just to anyone who's doing general market marketing or consumer marketing to the general public should read that, just to ground themselves on that mindset. I think both of those books are really important.
sincerely fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. My guest today has been Maria Twena, partner and global head of Consumer X at 9thWonder in Los Angeles. Maria, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Andy. Had a great time.